All right, so hey everybody, my name is Brian Anderson. I'm the VP of Technologies for Eagle Technologies. Well, we got 60 participants. This is going to have great attendance. I hope that means you guys are actually interested about the topic today. So today is going to be the first part of what we hope is an ongoing series that we call HPE Eagle Protips. And the idea here is we want to help you guys get more value out of some of the products you already own. So today's topic is something that's near and dear to my heart. It's how to leverage Nimble Snapshots, and you can see we're being a little coy here for pretty much everything. So before we even get to the agenda, I thought we would get your creative juices flowing and just talk about 6 reasons that snapshots rule. So reason number 1 is they're free. So this isn't the case on every vendor array, but with Nimble, there is no extra licensing. You don't have to pay any extra fees to take advantage of snapshots and all that they enable, and we're going to go over that. Secondly, a snapshot has 0 impact on a Nimble array. It's non-performance impacting. So you can take them in the middle of the day without any issue. There is a caveat there if you're quiescing applications, but we'll get into that. So copies are free. What I mean about this is twofold. So you can clone a workload leveraging a snapshot, and it occupies no additional space on the array until you write unique data. That also means that when you take a snapshot, it doesn't require any additional space until you've got unique data, which is another thing we'll get into. So there is no faster way to restore data than to not have to move it at all, right? So you're going to see this through some of the slides and the talking points and the demo, but the fastest way to restore a large amount of data or a small amount of data that's a large amount of files is leveraging snapshots. So all of this enables excellent DR. In my humble opinion, snapshots, which empower hardware-based replication, is the most efficient and the easiest way to have excellent DR. So finally, bacon. Everybody loves bacon, but the point I'm trying to make here is snapshots can really make you the hero in your environment. They enable you to do things that you can't do with traditional backup products, not that they obsolete traditional backup products, and they allow you to do a lot of things that can make you a hero in your environment. So we're going to go through some of those use cases and some of those examples today. So I'll go through pretty quick. I think most of the people on here are familiar with Eagle, but in a nutshell, Anthony and I like working at Eagle because we really are customer first and we get to focus on successful outcomes. And to be blunt, that means that marketing, management, sales, they don't tell Eagle engineers what to talk about. We ask the right questions and we do what we think is best for the customer. And that actually makes for a really nice place to work. Folks like Anthony and I spend a lot on due diligence. Lately, we've been having 4 or 5 meetings a week talking to vendors about due diligence, trying to stay up with where the market is trending, trying to see through the hype, what's reality and what's what I call marketecture, and just trying to help our customers make good decisions. It's something that we're proud of. It's something we spend a lot of time on, and I hope you guys see it when we have meetings with you.
Solution architect with HPE. I started back in May, but before that I was a customer for 10 years. I utilize Nimble Snapshots pretty regularly, and they save my bacon plenty of time. So I'm going to jump right into a use case of where I actually had to use snapshots to recover, and we'll go from there. Go ahead, next slide, Brian. So last year, Microsoft decided in August to change the way they sign their patches. Unfortunately, at the time, the company I worked for, our endpoint protection did not protect or did not account for this change. And we woke up to all of our 2008 R2 virtual machines in a non-bootable state. Luckily for us, we had about 200 virtual machines. We were able to recover instantly all of our virtual machines and then just focus purely on our physical machines. So this really helped us minimize the problem that we were trying to address, but also got our environments back up and running as quickly as possible. So there are a lot of use cases for snapshots, and this is one that benefited me. So go ahead and hit next slide, Brian. So whenever you get started with snapshots, the first thing you want to think about is how frequently I want to take my snapshots. So for us, we used a 5-tiered approach. We had a platinum, gold, silver, bronze, and iron tier. Our platinum tier would take snapshots every 15 minutes, all the way up to dailies and hourlies and weeklies. And then our bronze and iron tiers would take them once a week or once a day and wouldn't replicate. So you divvy it up how you see fit for your organization. Not everybody needs that level of granularity. But if you don't want to create any, or you just want to test them, there are some default templates you can use. But when you do decide to start taking advantage of snapshots, you've got to take into account which type you're going to use. You can use both, but I will define each one. So there's a crash consistent snapshot and an application consistent. So the application consistent is going to go and quiesce the application, like Brian mentioned earlier. So there's not a big performance impact, but it can impact your environment. So you want to be wary of that. It's going to pull all the information out of memory and put it on the storage so that the volume at the storage level can take a snapshot. With crash consistent, it's going to be as it sounds, as if the virtual machine, the power was shut off, or the power cord was pulled on a physical machine. So those are acceptable for most people. But if you need like a database like SQL or Oracle, you might want to look at application consistent. Couple other things to keep in mind: group your snapshots together, right? Or group your virtual machines together. So if you have an application that has 3 virtual machines, let's say it has a web server, an application server, and a database server, make sure you put those in the same collection so that when they're snapped, and you go to recover them, you're not recovering them at different snapshot intervals. Another thing to keep in mind is your backup software. So if your backup software takes advantage of snapshotting your virtual machines, make sure your timing for your array-based snapshots isn't at the same time. Otherwise, you're conflicting, trying to fight over who's going to snap the VM first, and it'll cause issues for you. So stagger your schedules and then split your virtual machines into smaller groups.
So
go ahead.
Hey Dustin, I got a question for you. Can you leverage application consistent and crash consistent in the same policy? And as an example, maybe at night when you're not worried about performance issues, you can take an application consistent snap of a SQL database, but maybe during the day, at the risk of of an IO impact, you want to take a bunch of crash consistent snaps. Can you do that?
Yeah, you can. So when you define your policy and you set your interval, you can say in that specific time frame, and there's a checkbox at the bottom, I want to use an application consistent for that nightly, and then the hourlies just uncheck that. So good question, Brian. Hit the next slide. All right, so you turned them on. Now what? What do you need to watch out for? First thing you want to watch out for is you want to look for the change rate, right? So on average, our install base sees a 1 to 2% daily change rate for their workloads, but that could vary for you. So just keep an eye on it, and you can monitor this in the data storage space tab on your Nimble array. Also, if you have multiple arrays, take advantage of replication. It's a great DR strategy, and it can help you, and it can supplement your backup solution. But it's not going to replace your backup solution. We can't emphasize this enough. You don't use snapshots as a sole backup solution. Use the 3-2-1. This doesn't count, right? This is still, you have 2 copies of the data, but it's still on the same medium. So you need to make sure you take advantage of other mediums. We used an MSA, and we offloaded our Nimble data onto that MSA. And there are some solutions that integrate very nicely with Nimble snapshots, and I'm sure your Eagle engineer team can talk to you about all those different solutions. Go ahead and hit the next one, Brian. All right, so let's talk about unmanaged snapshots. So this does happen, right? Sometimes in a policy or a backup software, a snapshot goes to take, but it doesn't clean up after itself. The most common way that unmanaged snapshots come about is you rename a policy. So once you create a policy and you start taking snapshots, the Nimble array is not going to delete the old snapshots for you. It's going to ask you to. And that can cause some impact, right? You're going to have a duplicate amount of data because you're still snapping. Maybe you took 30 and now you've changed the name and now you're taking another 30. Well, it's going to keep those other 30. So keep an eye out for it. You will get an alert from the support group, and it'll explain how you can kind of take advantage or clean these up. You can also take advantage of the time to live setting, which is in 5.1 and above, which you can set a time to live on your unmanaged snapshot. So they'll take care of themselves. Also, you can utilize your partners at Eagle. InfoSite can be given, or Eagle can be given access to your InfoSite so that they can help you manage these types of situations. So just another value that you can get through your Eagle partner. So.
All right. So there goes a meme. So I'm going to talk about real world use cases. So these are all scenarios that actually a lot of the guys that created this content have done personally. Hopefully they kind of get the juices flowing once again about different ways you can leverage snapshots. So I'm sure everyone on the call has restored files for users. Oftentimes they can become corrupt. More often, it's an incident with user error, right? Someone deleted something accidentally or intentionally, but they want it back. And then, of course, the scariest time you might have to restore a bunch of files is when you've got an issue with ransomware. Now, a lot of folks would want to use their traditional backup product to do this, and there's no reason you couldn't. But there are situations where this would be more effective. And so the first is when you have to restore a large number of files. You know, as we mentioned earlier, there's no quicker restore than not having to move your files. So if you've got 8,000 or 8 million encrypted files on a file server, you can instantaneously restore back to a point in time before the event happened. Now, you still have the responsibility of figuring out how the bad actor got in, but this could get you back up and running in minutes as opposed to hours or days. The other thing is maybe previous versions or your traditional backup product hasn't caught the change. Let's say someone creates a file at noon, they edit it 20 minutes later, they delete it 20 minutes later, and they want it back. Your snapshot schedule might have caught that, so you could use this as a mechanism to get them their file back. So Sean's going to work through this in the demo, but the steps are pretty simple once you're comfortable with them. You're going to go create a clone of the volume that has the VMDK in question. And in this situation, you're looking at just getting data. So what I recommend is you present that volume, that clone volume, to VMware. You are going to get a message that it's seen that VMFS disk signature before, and it can be a little scary the first time you see it. I think you might see that when Sean does his demo. You just want to create a new disk signature, and then you're going to add the VMDK to a VM that's up and running and present it as a drive. Now, keep in mind, this is a perfect copy, right? So I always recommended, and what I always did was presenting this to a different VM than it was initially presented to. I would use management VMs, or ultimately I actually had a VM running that was just called Restore for this very purpose. But once you mount that up, you give it a drive letter, you can pull off as many files as you want, put them wherever you want. You know, this typically only takes a couple of minutes once you're comfortable with it, and then you just have to tear it all down, right? So you unmount that cloned volume and you remove it from VMware. So let us know if you have any questions as we're moving through this. Anthony, keep me honest though I don't see him. So another really great use case is cloning workloads. As I mentioned earlier, it doesn't take any additional space on the array to clone a workload unless there's new writes coming in, and still that change is negligible compared to the overall size of the VM or the set of VMs. So I'm sure everybody here has had patches or application updates, bork, an OS, or prevent a service from starting. So if you want to test it ahead of time, it's really easy to create a clone of that environment. I have customers also that like to walk in every Monday and have a perfect copy of an important or a production environment that they can test on. So that's something you can even script and set up to do. And then finally, more than once I have made a configuration change in a file and borked something or had some unintended consequence. So these are all really good use cases for, once again, creating that perfect copy of one of your environments and playing with it. So this is really similar to the last example. You're going to create a clone of that VM by cloning the volume the VM lives on. You're going to present that to vCenter. Once again, you will get that notice that it's seen this volume before, but once you're comfortable answering that and having it create a new signature, it's really not that big of a deal. And then, of course, the other thing you need to remember is to put this in a network bubble, as I like to call it, because you don't want it interfering with your production infrastructure. But here's what's nice. It's not taking any extra space. So you can leave this up all week if you want and play with it. And then when you're done, you power it down, remove it from inventory, and you unmount and remove the volume. And once again, those are the steps that are maybe a little scary at first, but if you try it a couple of times, it's really quite easy. So step number 3, I think this is one that a lot of folks haven't thought about, but if you've got snapshots and you're replicating data, it's very easy to move workloads between data centers. So this might be that you created a workload over at DR because you have a bunch of free resources and you want to move it into production, or maybe you need to migrate data centers. So I personally always had a volume just specifically for this purpose. So I would vStorage motion something in production to this volume, I would let it replicate, and then I would announce the outage. And the outage typically is only a couple of minutes. You shut down the VM, you remove it from inventory, right? You remove that volume from those hosts, and then you initiate something called a volume handover. And this is a function in Nimble that finishes replication, and then reverses replication so you can continue to have DR, and then you simply add it to inventory on the other side and power it up. Now, obviously, I'm skipping a couple of steps, but I think you get the idea. And so it doesn't matter how big the VM is, right? You could start doing this a week in advance, and it limits the outage to just a couple of minutes. Pretty cool in my opinion. And then finally, the last use case I wanted to go over is just restoring entire VMs. Maybe the OS is corrupted. You know, once again, you had some updates, bork something. I've had customers accidentally delete 40 terabytes of VMs before. It happens. And then also, if you've got a responsible snapshot policy, maybe you've got 30 days of retention, you can think of this as a recycle bin. You're probably going to be more likely to get rid of zombie VMDKs, for instance, if you know you have 30 days to save your bacon, right? I can tell you personally, whenever I would encounter an application server that was blue screening or something bad had happened, if I knew that there had been no user files changed on it, my go-to was to go back in time an hour and restore that and see if it booted up successfully. And what I learned over time, and that it was surprising how often I would never encounter that issue ever again, and I'd save myself all that troubleshooting time. So these steps are really similar to the last steps, right? Shut down the existing VM, remove it from inventory. You might leave it there for a little while just in case you need something on it. Then you're going to create a clone of that volume, add it to inventory, power it on. And it's important to note you can power it on before you move it back to one of your production volumes. So from the minute that you notice something's wrong with one of your servers, you can have them booting up well within 5 minutes if you're comfortable with this process.